Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of faith and pop culture and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with Krista Bontrager. Thank you so much for joining us, Krista.
Happy to be here.
You are a theologian and you are also the director of
the scholar community here at Reasons to Believe. That's right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking about kind of a tricky topic and something that's prompting it. You know, there's a wildly popular show out there called The Handmaid's Tale, and I've seen it, and it's a really interesting premise. The premise is that we're looking at this future where we have this harshly patriarchal society, and the people living in the society, the men who are leading this society, are really prompted by their version of biblical texts. And I thought, wow, we need to talk about this because that is a narrative that some people have, that the Bible is extremely sexist in devaluing women. So let's unpack that.
Yes.
How would you respond to a skeptic's criticism that the Bible is sexist?
Well, I always love to begin that conversation with Jesus and looking at how Jesus interacts with women, because he did so many things that were countercultural. Jesus comes to us in the middle of a patriarchal culture, the Jewish culture, and also in the middle of the Greco-Roman culture, both patriarchal cultures. And Jesus does so many things that are counterintuitive to what he should have done in a patriarchal culture and how he treated women.
Right. So then, you know, I love that you're talking about Jesus was doing things that were countercultural, and there's evidence of that.
Yeah.
There's biblical examples of that. But let's look at the Old Testament when we think of verses like Genesis 3:16, where it says, "Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." So
Right.
how do we think about verses like that?
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start because Genesis, I think, is the foundation of so much of our thinking as Christians. In Genesis chapter 1, it says that both the man and the woman were created in the image of God. And this forms the foundation of the idea of the inherent dignity, value, and worth for both men and women. Men are not more important or more valuable than women, and women are not more important or more valuable than men. Rather, that we're equal partners to co-rule and reign the earth. But then something terrible happens in Genesis chapter 3, and that is the fall. The man and the woman fall into sin. And that verse that you mentioned is actually part of the curse. And so many scholars have made the point that patriarchy and the patriarchal system might be a distortion or a result of the fall. And that what what God's pronouncing there is a declaration of what will be, but not his ideal.
Right. So a deviation from God's ideal.
Yeah.
Right. So then now let's go back to Jesus. You talked about Jesus being countercultural.
Yeah.
But yet in the New Testament, we have like verses from Ephesians 5:22, "Wives, submit yourselves to your husband."
Yes.
And
what do we do with that?
Yes. What does that mean?
Yeah, Ephesians 5:22, it says that. But what's really important is what our friend Greg Koukl likes to say from Stand to Reason. He has a great phrase that says, never read a Bible verse. And I love that because you never want to read a Bible verse all by itself or in isolation. And if we look right above that verse in Ephesians 5:21, Paul is setting the stage for his case that he's going to make. And he says, submit yourselves to one another. And then what he does is this brilliant thing of using what's called household codes that were known in the Greco-Roman world, outlining relationships, husbands and wives, parents and children, masters and slaves. But notice that the big umbrella statement is submitting yourself to one another first. So the Christian paradigm of all relationships is one of love and mutuality. So whatever verse 22 says, whatever submission looks like, therefore wives submit to your husbands, it has to be consistent with an ethic of love. It's not about demanding respect. You must do this. Here's what respect must look like. Rather, it's in the context of love. And what love looks like is that it's patient, it's kind, it's gentle. And so when we are interacting with one another, we want to conduct ourselves as Jesus did.
Right. And speaking of how Jesus conducted himself, can you give kind of a specific example of, again, how Jesus was countercultural?
Yeah, one of my favorites is Luke chapter 10, the story of Mary and Martha. Jesus goes to Mary and Martha's house. And what's interesting is that Luke chapter 10 is a pivotal passage about discipleship. What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? Jesus sends out the 72 and they heal the sick and cast out demons and raise the dead. Right after that, Jesus goes to visit Mary and Martha. And what's interesting is Martha is very busy with the house, engaging in typical women hospitality roles of this is how we care for someone when a person of prominence comes to our home. But Mary does something totally different. She sits at the feet of Jesus. Many preachers, I hear this preached, is like, well, she's just sort of resting there and gazing at Jesus. But really, that's a euphemism for she's acting as a disciple. She's sitting at Jesus's feet. A way we could say that, a way that Ben Witherington and Craig Keener, two very prominent New Testament scholars, have said, she's engaging kind of in man's work. Yeah. That men were supposed to be the disciples and women were the hospitality people. But in this case, Mary is engaging in the best work of all, which is being a disciple of Jesus. So it's not just a man's world there in Luke chapter 10. It's not just the men who are sent out. The women are included as Jesus's disciples.
Amen. I love that example. And I wish that more people would just be aware of that, because it's so beautiful to think that we can also be, and we are supposed to be, disciples of Christ.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Krista. So if you'd like to hear more from Krista, visit reasons.org and search Krista Bontrager. She has countless articles on various topics, all really good content.